Okay.
Well, my husband Craig works there almost 30 years, and he was very proud of the fact that he worked. Dean, you shouldn't let me talk because you know. I have to share one thing. Craig had Parkinson, and during the last months, you know, he wouldn't always know names, but we went somewhere, and this guy came up, and they talked, and I said, who was it? I can't remember his name, but he worked certain lines, certain shifts.
47 years. Yeah. Good. Anyone else? Yeah, go ahead. There.
I worked there for 28 years, and then was done.
Yeah, I understand. Go ahead.
Louis worked there.
Joe, go ahead.
31 and a half.
31 and a half years?
At 31.
Char, what, your husband?
Louis worked there 6 months out of high school.
Well, go ahead.
I was there from 65 to 81.
Well, go ahead. Yeah. 10 years. Yeah. Well, but it influenced it, but I'm trying. Go ahead, Brian.
I was there over 30 years, and my dad worked in a tool room, and my father-in-law worked in a foundry. So, a lot of the family worked there.
Yeah. Well, out of Charles City. Just kind of kick off, I want to welcome everybody here. I'm truly humbled to see this big crowd. And then also welcome our viewers online. McKenna's recording this as we speak, and we thank everyone for their support. This museum's doors swing open every day because of Oliver, the support that we get from all the loyal fans, the collectors. We are basically the manuals, parts catalogs, you name it, data, manufacturing data, anything. And collectors, we're finding out, are getting more passionate about that all the time. In fact, I'm going up tomorrow to Minneapolis Moline. This was placards that were made the last day the iron was poured in the foundry. It's a highly sought after thing now, but it basically commemorates the Charles City Foundry, and you can purchase these once in a while online. You know, last iron poured, Charles City, Iowa, July 15th, 1993. Hard par, Oliver, White, and no idea. That was kind of the chain of command of how the different companies that owned the Charles City facility. Before I go anywhere, I have to recognize some people. I am not a tractor expert, or I'm not an expert in this field, but I have a lot of support. One of them, I get calls probably on average. I don't know how many calls a week I get. People, hey, do you know what about this, that? And Scott, our associate in the museum here, he helps me dig through the files, and we find things, and it's a rewarding thing. Next, as Kay mentioned, my cousin Craig Tjaden, his position in he was kind of head of scheduling, and those parts got to the assembly line at the right time. Both him and I were there in the last days. My job was I was head of factory maintenance, but we had strict edicts from corporate. Absolutely no pictures will be taken. And fortunately, Craig, in his covert manner, and a really nice 35 millimeter camera and took a lot of nice shots. And that's what a lot of this presentation's about. And we really don't realize how important those photos are till today. But thanks to Craig, that came about. And of course, lastly, the Floyd County Museum. Without McKenna and Scott here, there's a tremendous amount of assets and resources here that are invaluable to a lot of collectors, and we have the ability to present them to at their wishes. So again, thanks to everyone on that. A little bit of history on me, and Linda said we have to carve out a lot of this because some of my former presentations I'd go through, I was very fortunate that I had a lot of different positions in the plant or in the vat company itself. I started out in 1974, fresh out of college, as a service trainee, and I was hired by the general service manager. His name was Max Hanley. That guy in the blonde hair and the glasses in the middle, that's me in a younger man's clothes. But one of my first jobs was, or positions, was we'd just come out with a white farm line, and we were having schools, training schools, and for some reason or other, they thought I was qualified to teach. There was a new engine that we were going to be using in the line called the Perkins engine. It was a purchased engine from England. And this is me at a service school trying to train some guys on what the uniqueness of the engine was. At that time, there was over almost 3,000 people employed in Charles City, Iowa. And a lot of you guys that mentioned that you've been there 30 years, you remember those days. I mean, it was chaos in this town. Charles City was a boom town. There's been quotes that there were 30 bars in this town. Happy hour happened every 8 hours. I mean, the shifts turning over, payroll was being cashed. Morgan's Tap, there was an individual who told me they would bring in on Friday nights close to $100,000 in cash, and they'd be cashing payroll checks out of a nail apron, you know. So it was unbelievable. I know you could probably attest to that, Ron. The amount of money that was moving in and out. Again, well, 1974, that was kind of a record too. June of 1974, the Charles City plant produced 1,256 tractors in 1 month. That was a record. And it was a push like unbelievable. And if you do the math on 40, basically the number of days, 20 days of operation, that's an average of 60 tractors a day. Go ahead, yeah, join us.
So if anyone needs chairs, there are chairs back there and you can pick them out and sit on them.
So, 60 tractors a day was quite a feat for a little town of Charles City, Iowa. Then again, I'm going to jump, and I don't want to talk a lot about me, but I had many positions. Started out in the service department, was in product engineering, product test and development. I traveled a lot for the company. But my last final job in 1990 until the plant closed, I was a factory maintenance supervisor. I was over a team of about 20 people I reported. That's me in the far left. And then the next guy in the white shirts who I reported to, his name was Denny Bartz. He was over all the Charles City site for as far as maintenance of the factory and the foundry. Our job was just to keep the plant running. In other words, anything from fixing toilets to fixing precision lathes, that was our job, or heat treat furnaces, you name it. We had a crew of a little over 20 guys. This is part of the shift, the day shift. We basically had 2 shifts of maintenance people, but I went from having no knowledge in manufacturing to being thrown into this, and it was like a migraine headache every day. But what it did teach me is there's so many facets to tractor, to manufacturing, and I learned the marketing side, I learned the engineering side, and this was obviously the manufacturing side, and it was a rewarding experience. Good guys. The lower man on the left with the hat, probably you remember, a lot of you remember him. His name was Lawrence Tegmeyer. He was the hatchet thrower, the rendezvous guy. Lawrence always made sure that if there was a death in the family, or at Thanksgiving. You always had a big meal. Our maintenance shop at Thanksgiving Day was the day before. Smelled like Thanksgiving. He was very, very passionate about that. Good bunch of guys. Sad part of this, a lot of them are gone now too. So, and I was a young kid. And one more story and I'll move on. But that gentleman in the white there, his name was Oral Keys. And Fridays, one of my job was to hand out payroll checks. And he'd always say, well, Tjaden, you finally got something to do. You can hand out checks today. So, but it was fun. It was fun. A little history on Charles City tractor manufacturing. I want to just cover this kind of briefly. These two guys, Charles Hart and Charles Parr, they were college buddies from the University of Wisconsin. Charlie Hart, on the left, he went to Iowa State for a while. He's a Charles City resident. His dad farmed out here. And they met. And the reason that Charles Hart transferred there, University of Wisconsin had a crack shop mechanical engineering department. And they wanted to learn more about that. Their goal, after those two guys met, Charles Hart was the dreamer, the marketer type guy. Charles Parr was the nuts and bolts boy. He was the one, he was the true engineer. He didn't want to be dynamic, where Mr. Hart was the show me the flam, he was the pizzazz guy. But they wanted, as an engineering project, they had a small manufacturing plant. It was on Murray Street in Madison, Wisconsin. And they wanted to expand. They wanted to build, their goal was someday to build some sort of a steam replacement that would replace steamers that would have an internal combustion engine on it. But they were still building just stationary engines for pumping water, you name it, generating a little electricity on a farm, that type of thing, small engines. They went to the city of Madison, they said, we want to expand, here's our goal. And it's amazing how things don't change. The Madison's answer back was, well, we really don't want a dirty, stinky foundry downtown here, and we don't want a machine shop, but we'll give you some ground out west of town. It had no rail, it had no infrastructure, it had no electricity, no nothing. It was basically just a bare farm plot. And so they were hard. They were very frustrated about that. Geez, we want to expand and they're not really working with us. So Mr. Hart, he came home for a holiday and was expressing his frustration to his dad. And his dad was a farmer out here, kind of an influential farmer. He says, I might know something we can get done. And they met with these two guys, A.E. Ellis, C.D. Ellis, and it's Ellis and Ellis, was their name, was their company. And they were part of what is now the First Security Bank. It was called First National Bank at that time. But they were, it was unbelievable how these guys, A.E. was the kind of the real estate entrepreneur, C.D. was the attorney. They worked together. And I was able to find some information. There's a book on We Are the Ellises. And in 1917, they had a balance sheet in there. Their net worth was $3 million in 1917. If you do the math right now, that's $75 million net worth. And so they got some of their buddies together, and they said to Charles Hart and Parr, hey, we'll get you $100,000 in operating. We got some ground in between two major rail lines if you'll move that operation to Charles City. And sure enough, what happened is history, was what it amounted to. A little more about the era of the time. Henry Ford in 1903 was just starting Ford Motor Corporation. It was the first time that Ford Motor was going to go into manufacturing of cars. Marconi, the radio man, just a couple years before that, had his first successful transatlantic wireless communication. So you can kind of understand where they're coming from. Teddy Roosevelt, by default, got appointed president because McKinley died, And he was negotiating with the country of France on building the Panama Canal. France had gone broke trying to build that canal, and so his goal was, we're going to build that canal. So just kind of gives you a little bit of history of the times then, and I look at it as how leading edge the city of Charles City was at that time. You know, that we were dealing with heavy manufacturing and getting things going, the same thing as them. White Motor Corporation, who eventually ended up buying Oliver in 1960. In 1899, they patented the flash boiler was going to be used in steam cars. And in 1900, they outsold their closest competitor 2-1 on steam-powered cars. So that White Motor was an old company too, and I know a lot of us have maybe a hard feeling about White Motor. Some of us said, White Motor never came to Charles City, maybe we'd still be in operation. I don't know if that's true or not, but they were an old company too. Okay, on July 5th of 1901, Charles Park broke ground on the first building to be built on the site, and that would have been, this is the administration building. And then the building behind it was building number 1. That was the first buildings that were built on the site. It was going to be basically a small erection building and a small foundry with an office building. And in 1906, they said, we don't have enough room. And this picture was taken in about 1906, where it said, sales have been so brisk, we got to expand. And they were offered they got a capitalization with the board of directors of another $200,000, and they built what we call this building number 3. And if you were standing on Main Street or say in Jacobs Elevator's parking lot looking straight east, that's the building you would have been looking at. That was, things were booming. I mean, and some of it was because, and please don't take this wrong, I'm not throwing Mr. Hart under the bus, but he's went crazy on spending money, and he was the dreamer, and boy, we're going nuts, you know, if he had a dime, he'd spend $1, is what it amounted to, and it sometimes gave serious heartburn to the Ellis family. It was times when it was not real happy camping there. But this, at the same time, in 1907, the sales manager, his name was W.H. Williams for Hart Park, and they were looking at how do we get this, you know, we want to say that they called them traction engines, gasoline powered traction engines. That was kind of a wordy thing to put into their sales literature. Well, he came up with an acronym that has been used to this day industry-wide, traction motor. And that was all brought about right here in Charles City by the sales manager of Hart Park. So this is just a few more of the same building 3. And again, building 3 was, the general offices were on the right, the assembly erection floor was the building that was where the hard bars were built, like the assembly line was, and again, this is the building. If you were standing on Grand Avenue and looking straight east, that was the building you saw. Okay, enough about little history. I know a lot of you maybe came to see some of the pictures that Craig took, and this is what I'm going to do is just kind of walk you through the plan on taking you from basically the scrapyard in the foundry area and steel receiving, where they've shipped in the bar stock and rough stock, right to walk you through the plant right out to the end of the assembly line. So one of the staples in any manufacturing plant is compressed air. It's used to actuate hoists, used to clamp down chucks on lathes. It's used to run impact wrenches. It's used to open doors and close doors on heat treat furnaces. So it's a very high demand thing. And this is just one of with 5 compressors total. There was 3 in the plant, 2 in the foundry. They were interconnected via a tunnel that went under E Street. But this one was rated at 450 horsepower, and each one of them were running on and off all the time. There would be a time in the winter when we would be on what they called interruptible service, where Iowa Public Service, and that was one of my jobs at the time, would say, okay, we're going to shut you off of natural gas. We don't have enough natural gas for everybody in the city of Charles City. We were on interruptible service. So then we'd have to manufacture our own natural gas. And what we did, we had a facility out east of the foundry where we had a huge amount of tank farms there, or tanks, billets filled with LP gas. And we'd mix LP gas and compressed air together to make natural gas. And it was like a bomb going off. I was terrified every time we go out there because everything's cranking and banging, and that is when every one of them compressors would have to be running wide open just to supply enough air to keep the plant in natural gas. And of course, all the heat treat furnaces, all the heating elements, all the foundry furnaces and everything, they were built around natural gas usage, so we had to have the mixture right to keep the plant in operation. This is, again, a building 3. This is the building I've been talking about. This would be on the east end of building 3, and this is where we received in the bar stock, rough materials for the first operation. You can see the crankshafts in the foreground there. That was the Minneapolis Moline engine line